introduction. Mark Morel is president and co-founder of Career Edge, a leading provider of online driver trainings for trucking industry, with a comprehensive library of safety and compliance courses supported by advanced management and reporting functions. Career Edge helps more than 2,000 fleets train their driver without sacrificing miles or requiring people to come in on weekend. Mark is also co-founder of the Best Fleet to Drive For program, an annual evaluation of the best workplaces in North American trucking industry, produced in partnership with the Truckload Carrier Association. So today's topic of discussion is how fleets are going to or changing their training programs. I think which is more needed right now, and I think Mark will share those details, and I'm just opening this webinar. Before we start the actual discussions on this, and we have a chat box. You can please send us the message in the chat box if you have any question, and then I will send that question direct to Mark, and he can answer you back on that. And also, just a quick reminder, Trucking Network is hosting another virtual job fair for transportation industry to help to support their dry hiring needs. And if any fleet need more drivers or owner-operator mechanics, please send your email to me or call me at 647-818-2121, and we will discuss this further. Mark, your turn now. Good morning. Welcome to the webinar, please.
Okay, thanks, Naveen. And welcome, everybody. So today we are going to talk about training programs, fleet training programs, primarily about training for drivers, but also for office staff and mechanics. And some of this stuff will be applicable to everybody. And as much as we are primarily focused in our normal work on online self-study training, we're going to talk about a bunch of different types of training delivery. My background is actually all kinds of training delivery. So we're going to talk about a variety of different things today. And I'm going to open this up with a sentiment that I think has been kind of forefront for everybody over the last 7 or 8 months, which is what is happening in the world. This applies to everything in our daily lives. We have all been faced with tons of upheaval in the world, and it has really had a dramatic effect in the training world as well. Started in March, everybody went into lockdown, and all of these training programs had to move online. There was a big scramble, and everybody's like, what is going on? What do we do here? Things that had previously been pretty common, pretty standard ways of doing things, all of a sudden weren't allowed. So everybody had to sort of change what they were doing. And now, 6 months later, the tsunami has receded a little bit, the tide has gone out, and people are kind of looking at what's left and saying, okay, well, now what do we do? What should we be doing? Should we keep doing what we were doing before? And should we go back to what we were doing previous to the lockdown? And as a result of that, we're seeing people kind of reverting to some older ways of thinking in some cases, and coming up with some ideas that are all sort of born out of the experience of the last 7 or 8 months and the different ways that people respond to it. So we have certainly seen some people go back to a position that we had seen periodically pre-pandemic, which was the idea that everything should be done in the classroom. If we're training people, it should be done in a classroom, and that's all there is to it. We don't need to do anything online. We're going to do it in class. And some people moved online during the pandemic and have tried to move back to class. Some people never moved online at all and just said, okay, if we can't go in class, we're going to park it, and we'll resume classroom when we can. And that's not the best approach. But there were also some people that have sort of made a tentative move online during the pandemic and said, well, this online delivery virtual classroom is pretty much the same thing as a physical classroom. So we're going to approach it the same way. And just sort of treat it the same way that we did when we were doing a physical classroom. But that's also not a great approach. That's problematic too. And for the other end of the spectrum, the people that have really gone above and beyond, that have really jumped on it, sometimes they get really excited and say, okay, well, we don't need to do any more classroom. We've got this online stuff. Now we've got these online self-study tools. We've got a variety of things that we can do. We don't ever need to do classroom again. And none of those really is the best way to approach it. Those are more extreme positions and a little bit, I would not necessarily want to say misguided, but I guess overly optimistic one way or another. Because the reality is that to deliver an effective and engaging training program, we actually need all of those tools. And we need to have physical classroom, we need to take advantage of the virtual options that are available, and we also need to do things with online self-study because all of that fits into a complete package. They all have things that they're really good at, so we need to make sure that we're able to balance them and find that place where we're getting the most out of each one of these things, the physical classroom, the virtual classroom, the online self-study tools, and making the most of them to deliver the most comprehensive and effective training program available. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about each of these delivery methods in a little bit of detail and talk about what things they're good at and what things they're really not good at. We're also going to see how we can build on that to leverage their strengths. And then for a couple minutes at the end, I'm going to give you some ideas about how to combine these things, because often the best solution isn't one or the other. It's a combination of two or more of them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And there will certainly be opportunity for questions. All of this information that we're going through is really presented as kind of a starting point to give you some ideas and get you thinking about things that you could be doing within your own organization. We're not going to say that there is one right way and a wrong way or anything like that. We are going to sort of present what each of these things is good for and talk about how we can make the most of them in different situations. So let's start by looking at these individual delivery methods and how we can approach them. So we've really got three main ones that we're looking at here. Physical classroom, virtual classroom, and online self-study. And just for clarification, when I say online self-study, what I'm talking about is the sort of interactive, self-paced e-learning that is of the type that we produce and other vendors produce as well, that is designed for somebody to go in and take a course on their own schedule at their own time. But that's a lot to say as a mouthful. Interactive, self-paced e-learning or even online self-study is a lot to say over and over again. So I'm just going to use the shorthand and say online or online self-study. And that's what I mean in those situations. The virtual classroom is, as I'm sure you all know by now, it's these sort of web-based live e-learning tools, what used to be referred to as live e-learning, but now we just refer to it as virtual class, and it is very different from the physical class. What I find fascinating about the last 7 or 8 months is that I've been doing a variation of this presentation for probably 5 years now. And up until March of this year, it didn't even include the virtual classroom part of it. Virtual classroom, live e-learning is something that we have been doing for 20 years now in other industries. And in fact, the last real job that I had working for somebody else back in 2003, I was doing virtual classroom stuff, doing live e-learning at a company that did that for participants all around the world. When we came into trucking, nobody really was even talking about it. Even a year ago, nobody was really using any of these virtual classroom tools. So there's been a massive shift in the last 6 or 7 months that all of a sudden trucking has sort of rushed to catch up with where some other industries were before and made a huge leap into the world of virtual classrooms. So that's, I find, very fascinating. And there are the normal growing pains that come along with that, and we're going to talk about some of those. But in a modern, progressive thinking fleet that wants to have a very well-trained and very effective workforce, there are, let's say, three main ways of delivering training content: the physical classroom, virtual classroom, and the online self-study. So you've got three of those. And then the question is, if you've got three of them to choose from, what do you do when you're trying to decide? How do you pick which one to use? That's often the challenge. And so you've got these three at hand. Which one are you going to use? And sometimes when I ask that question, people think I'm a little bit nuts. They think it's a very obvious answer. What do you mean, which one are we going to choose? It's obvious. It's all based on scheduling and physical distancing. We would like to get people together in a classroom, but if we can't, because we can't put people together because of scheduling issues, we'll put them online. If we can get them together at the same time, but we have physical distancing requirements and pandemic stuff, okay, then we'll do virtual. And those are probably going to be the main reasons, or the first starting point in making a decision about which delivery model you use. But those aren't the only things. There are other things to consider when making that decision. And at the same time, each of these tools is really good at some things and really not good at some others. So even if scheduling and lockdown or physical distancing issues dictate the choice, it's important to understand what these things are good at so that we can make the most of them and have the most effective delivery with each of those different tools. So what we are going to do now is just look through each of these different delivery methods. What are they good at and what are they not good at? And how can we take advantage of that? So let's start with classroom, physical classroom. The default training delivery method in most fleets and most of the industry: get people together in a classroom and get an instructor up there to deliver the content. And classroom training has some really powerful strengths that are important to recognize. And chief among those is the fact that it is fantastic for collaboration. There is no other training delivery model that allows you to do collaboration as a group with the same level of effectiveness. So you can get people together, put them into groups and get them working on exercises, have a discussion, get them to brainstorm. All of that kind of stuff works beautifully in a classroom and is very hard to do in other ways. Classroom also allows you to do very specialized content. You can put together material for a handful of people and it's cost effective to deliver it, and that's really nice. And at the same time, you can also do it in different languages very quickly and very easily. Even if the supporting material, if the slides and the handouts are in English, if the instructor is fluent in other languages, then they can deliver it in those other languages on the fly. Fantastic. And part of those 2 points are delivered by the fact that it is very quick to put together classroom training material. In general, the development time is pretty quick. With classroom training, most of your time requirement, most of your effort is in the delivery itself. So putting the material together is relatively quick. So there's some really nice strengths there that we want to take advantage of. However, it's not perfect. It's got some real disadvantages that I think everybody who has done it is well aware of. And top of that list is the fact that it's very disruptive and as a result, it's costly. So if you're putting together a classroom training course, you need everybody to be there, and that could be a real headache. That means that they're not on the road generating revenue. They're not at home having time off. They're not doing their regular job. They're sitting in that class, and they're all sitting in that class together, which is disruptive to the business and as a result can be very costly. That's the one that most people think of when they're talking about classroom and how to get out of classroom. They're thinking about overcoming that headache. But the other issues with classroom are just as important to recognize, and that second point is one of them there, the pacing issue. Classroom is always at the mercy of whatever pace the instructor decides to use, which is always going to be somewhere in the middle, which means it's somewhere that it's too fast for some people and too slow for some others. You will never get pacing that is perfect for everybody. So that causes a little bit of problem, makes it a little bit less efficient, and it's never going to be an ideal experience for every participant. And the third point is that it is relatively slow to get content into people's heads. The amount of time that it takes to get classroom training out to a large group or even to a small group can be quite extensive. If you've got a lot of people to train, it takes a lot of different training sessions. Even if you've only got a small group to train, it takes a lot more time to get that into their heads, to get that content conveyed to them than it does through other mechanisms. So some real strengths with Classroom, but also some challenges that we need to overcome. Virtual Classroom, being based on the physical classroom model, shares some of the strengths and weaknesses, but also adds a few of its own. So the biggest advantage that it offers, of course, is you don't have to travel. So it's a little bit less disruptive. You don't have to have everybody physically in the same place, even though you do need them to be available at the same time. You don't need them to be all in one place, which dramatically reduces the cost, and the business disruption doesn't eliminate it, but it does remove some of that. And because you don't have to have them all in one place, it's great for situations like a pandemic where you can't have people sitting in a room together. You need to have them distanced somehow and still be able to communicate and get the information at the same time. So those are some things that it adds. It shares the advantages with physical classroom in terms of specialized content delivery and native language delivery. So you can make some content that is only for a small group, and you can deliver it in whatever language you're comfortable speaking. So virtual classroom has some real benefits there. The disadvantages, though, some of the same disadvantages of a regular physical classroom, pacing still is a challenge. You're still one instructor delivering that content at whatever pace you decide as the instructor, which means that everybody has to deal with that. And it's still fairly slow to get that content into their heads. A couple of other parts that people don't often think about, what are differences with virtual classrooms, is that it doesn't really work for collaboration. Even though it's instructor-led and you've got a group of people there, the collaboration doesn't really work as well as it does in a physical classroom. And I see people trying it. In the early days, when the first live e-learning products came onto the market, they mimicked classroom in every way. So you would have virtual whiteboards and flip charts, and you would have the ability to break people up into groups and have them do exercises. And it just didn't work. Nobody wants to do that. It can be tough to get people working in groups in a physical classroom, but it's a non-starter when you put them into virtual breakout rooms. Nothing happens. So the collaboration really doesn't work. I see the schools, the high schools and colleges are trying to do that now. They're making all their kids come on video and try to call on them to answer questions and things. It's a fail. It really is not working very well. So virtual classroom does not handle collaboration all that well. It also is way harder to maintain engagement. And this is something that I think a lot of people haven't really even thought much about. When you're in a physical classroom, you have everybody in an environment that kind of immerses them in the experience. They are in that physical space, so their head goes to, I'm in class, I'm in training now. And they also have all the social cues that come around with that. They've got other people in the class that they can see. They've got the instructor who they know is watching them. So all of that gives subtle reinforcement to the fact that they should be paying attention, and they should actually be there and thinking about what you're saying. If the other people are paying attention, they will feel like they should be doing that as well. If the other people are tuning out, they're more likely to do that. So in a virtual class, you don't have that. You don't know, even if you have the cameras on for everybody, as the instructor, you don't really know what they're looking at. They're sitting outside of that physical environment in a different physical environment. They may be at home, they may be in a cafe or whatever. They've got all kinds of other distractions coming at them. They've got all of the normal notifications and messages and all kinds of things pushing for their attention. So it's way harder to maintain the engagement in a virtual class than it is in a physical class. And as we'll see, that requires some things to be changed. That requires some adjustments to the way that delivery is done. So those are some strengths and weaknesses of physical and virtual classes. And if we look at online self-study, we see that it actually complements those things pretty nicely. It has strengths where the others have weaknesses. It's, number one, flexible and non-disruptive. If somebody is doing an online self-study course, they can do it whenever they like. You don't have to have an instructor getting people together at a certain time or trying to get them into a particular place. Somebody wants to do part of a course at noon and the other part at midnight, they can. Perfect. And along with that, they can set their own pace. If they want to go quickly, they can go quickly. If they want to slow down, they can do that as well. So all of those things make it much more cost effective to deliver and provide a much more engaging experience in general for people. And as a result, they can absorb that content much more quickly. So I talked about classrooms, physical and virtual, being fairly slow to get content delivered. Online, it's entirely different. And as a perfect example, the general rule of thumb between classroom and online self-study is that a full day classroom course takes about 3 hours or so online to deliver. So big difference there, roughly half the time. So that's a really big plus. The downsides of the online self-study are that it doesn't do collaborative learning at all. I said that virtual class is weak with collaboration. Online self-study, there's no collaboration. You're not doing it with a group. You're doing it totally on your own. And as much as some colleges and universities have traditionally tried to make people do collaboration in groups by having them post into forums and have sort of group text chats and things, it's been a fail. So online self-study is not collaboration. It's completely an individual experience. It's also best when it's generalized content. It doesn't work very well for very specific individualized content the way Classroom does. And part of that is because it takes a much longer time to deliver or to develop it. With online self-study, all of the headaches are in the development side. Once it's built, the delivery is much simpler, it's quicker, and it's way more efficient. Classroom is the opposite of that. You build it real quick, but all the headache is in the delivery. So we need to take advantage of those strengths and understand the weaknesses, and we need to recognize that online self-study, because it is slow to develop, and because the content is generalized, it really only works well in specific areas. It's a fantastic tool in those areas, but it's not going to be everything. So that takes us to the point where we can start thinking about how to make the most of these things. We've got some very clear strengths in each of these delivery methods, and we've got some very distinct weaknesses. So how can we take advantage of those strengths and avoid the weaknesses to use them to their best advantage? And there are a few things to keep in mind in order to do that for each of these different delivery methods. For classroom, physical classroom, we absolutely want to take advantage of the fact that it is great for collaboration. If we've got everybody there, if we've gone through the headache of getting everybody into a physical classroom together, let's make the most of that. Have them tell their stories, have discussions, have group projects, group exercises, get them to work together as a team. If you're bringing people into a classroom, it's not just about the content, it's about the relationships. It's about getting to know the company, getting to know each other, building the team, all of those things that you can do so much better in a physical classroom. Take advantage of that. And at the same time, there's no reason why you all need to be sitting together in a classroom. You want to have it really effective? Get everybody out of the classroom, go somewhere else. If you're talking about something to do with maintenance, go over to the shop, go out in the yard and do it. Actually look at the thing that you're talking about. There is absolutely no reason why physical classroom needs to be an instructor standing at the front of the room talking about slides up on a projector. For some things, yes, that makes sense. But wherever possible, get out of that classroom and move around. The best classroom training situations that I've seen in the trucking industry are fleets where people move around through the course of a day. And I love this example. Not a big fleet, Motor Carrier Service out of Toledo. They have people come in, they do part of it in the classroom, and then you rotate over to the shop and you do some inspection stuff and talk to the maintenance people. Then you rotate into the dispatch area and talk about the dispatch process. That's a fantastic orientation program because it gets you physically moving, which keeps the blood circulating, which helps your learning and all of that stuff. But it also gets them to see what it is that they're actually learning about and interact with it in a much more real way. So it's much more effective and a much deeper learning experience. So wherever possible, get out of the classroom, go out into the yard, go to the shop, go over to dispatch. It's going to create a much more effective training experience or education experience for the participants. For virtual classroom, the secrets to success here, the keys to doing it really well and taking advantage of the strengths, are a little bit different. And the big one is that we want to focus on the visuals. And if you think about a lot of the classroom training that we see in trucking, it is a slide deck. Sometimes it's death by PowerPoint. It's a million words on that slide. And it's an instructor standing at the front just reading those slides. And that absolutely does not work in a virtual world because people don't have to pay attention. They don't have those social cues. They don't have that physical environment. And they do have tons of different distractions. So just putting up slides and reading those slides is not ever going to work. You need to give them visuals, something to look at, something to pay attention to and think about. And images work great. There's lots of different things that you can do, diagrams, even the bullet points that are kept to a minimum can be very useful. But you have to give them something more than just a page of text that you're reading. And the astute observers among you will no doubt be recognizing that I'm not doing that right now. I am giving you bullet points and not giving you giant pictures and things like that, which is the second point, that training virtually and webinars are not the same thing. In the training world, your objective is to have participants paying attention, deep learning, getting into it, and focusing on what you're saying and all of the elements of it. A webinar is different. The reality of a webinar, and I fully recognize this coming into this session today, the reality of a webinar is that people are not paying rapt attention to it. They are sitting at their desks, they're generally listening to it in the background, and they'll go over periodically and check the slide, then go back to what they're doing. It's always kind of a background, a add-on to what they're doing outside of it. So you have to recognize that. In delivering a webinar, you can deliver a fantastic webinar and give people good value, but it's not quite the same as training. In a training world, you want them to be engaged. You want them to be forgetting about the rest of the world because your content is so engaging. And in order to do that, you need to up that the game in terms of the delivery. The regular instructor who is kind of standing at the front of the room, lazily reading the slides, it just doesn't work. And if you're delivering that, nobody's going to pay attention. You can't kind of slouch and talk slow like this. Half of you are probably asleep already just from that. That doesn't work in a virtual world. And unfortunately, I've seen unfortunate instructors who are delivering like that. There are some instructors who just do it because they like talking, and that doesn't work in a virtual world. You've got to be way more engaged. And I saw a presentation earlier this week where they were talking about best practices for Zoom meetings and Zoom presentations. And they said you have to be 20% more energized than anybody else on that session in order to keep people engaged. So that is critical to having success with a virtual classroom. You have to think about it more like a newscaster, and how can you deliver that content in an engaging, excited way and have lots of visuals to reinforce it. For online self-study, self-paced courses, there's really only a couple of things that you need to focus on in order to make sure you've got great success. The biggest one is make sure that you give people time to complete it. This is a challenge that we've seen with people, is that they will sometimes assign a bunch of online self-study courses and not give people enough time to get through them. And then all that happens is participants just get stressed about having all of these things to complete and the deadline. They're worried about all the things they have to do, and then it never really works well. So that's not what you want. You don't want people worried about getting it done. You want people relaxed and able to think about the content. So give them ample time. Don't assign too much and bombard them with things. And also make sure that people have equal access. This kind of applies to virtual classrooms as well. And it's a way less of an issue than it was 6 months or a year ago. But not everybody in trucking has access to great technology, a late model phone with fast internet, or a great laptop or desktop machine at home. So you got to make sure that if you want people to participate, they have the tools to participate. So that might mean setting up a couple of computers in a driver lounge, or having some tablets that are available that people can use. But think about that. That's the big thing to make sure that you have success with these things. And a couple of things to watch out for when putting together these plans. As we talked about, you can't treat virtual like physical training. Virtual classroom and physical classroom are very different. They cannot be approached the same way. And I've just spent 5 minutes talking about it, so I'm not going to hammer it too hard, but it's important enough that it's worth saying again, they are very different and we need to approach them accordingly. Second thing to watch out for is trying to do virtual and physical at the same time. I've seen this one, and it's a joy to behold, and it never works. This is a situation where somebody is saying, well, I'm delivering this classroom, physical classroom. I've got the students here. Why don't I set up a camera and broadcast it? That'll work great. You know, I'll get it out to the virtual people as well. No, it doesn't work for a couple of reasons. First, it's already hard enough to get engagement and make people feel like they're collaborating part of something in a virtual classroom. It's even worse if they know that there's a group of people that are physically there and they're cut out from that. So they're really disconnected when they're not even part of that same group. It doesn't do anything to make the virtual participants feel like they're really embedded and learning something. So that's a problem. The second thing is that it never works from a technical standpoint. You know, I didn't even get into the challenges of virtual delivery in terms of lighting and sound and camera quality and all of that, which make a huge difference to the effectiveness of the delivery. But if you've got a camera at the back of the room, it sounds awful and it looks awful. And if you've got the lighting in the room set up so that you can see your slides nicely, for the live participants, it looks terrible on camera. It just doesn't work. The audio is going to be bad unless you're going and buying dedicated camera setups and lapel microphones and things like that and doing a whole AV setup. You cannot do virtual and physical at the same time and have successful. It will be a fail for sure. Another one to watch out for, this is one that we've seen some people try in the past and it doesn't work very well, is taking that classroom content, that physical classroom material, and making it into online. So you've got your slide deck that you use when you're delivering your class. Take that, upload it into an online system, try and make it online self-study. It doesn't work because, very simply, if you've built slides in such a way that they are effective in a physical classroom delivery, in other words, they're heavy on the visuals, they're reinforcing what you're saying, they're designed to complement your presentation, they're not going to work in self-study because there's not enough information there. If you have enough information on those slides that somebody can learn the content just by reading them, you've got terrible classroom content. It's not going to work. You have to treat each of these as distinct models and use them accordingly. Similarly, flipping it around and trying to use online content in a classroom doesn't really work either. I've seen people do this where they'll subscribe to a training service, maybe our service, maybe somebody else's, and they will go into a classroom course, they'll pull up one of these online courses and try and go through it in front of the class. And that doesn't work because it forces people to just be spectators. The whole point of the online self-study is that it gets people involved. It gives them something to explore, to click around, to try different things. There are exercises, and there's a lot of things that they need to kind of engage with in order to get full experience of learning. When you're doing that in a classroom and the instructor is doing it, then the participants are really just watching somebody else go through and click around and do that. And that really doesn't work very well. It doesn't work because they're not engaged. Participants are not doing anything. They're not active in that experience. They're just spectators, and they're not going to get very much out of it. I used to make a joke that it's like watching somebody else play a video game, but now there's a whole thing. I mean, there's Twitch and there's whole YouTube channels that are nothing but people watching others play video games. But those are more about the reaction than the actual gaming. So watching somebody else, watching an instructor go through an online course when you're in a classroom is really more like watching somebody else check their email. It ain't fun, and it doesn't work very well. You're not remembering much afterwards. So we want to avoid that. So now we've gone through the things that these different tools are good for. We understand where their weaknesses are. We've thought a little bit about how to leverage their strengths so that we can make the most of them, and we've identified some things that we absolutely want to watch out for. Now, we can put all of that together into some different combinations and see how we can actually use these tools, some examples of some different ways that we can use some of these tools in a more engaging and effective way that takes advantage of those strengths and provides an experience that's going to be better for participants. And some of this will be specific to driver training, but some of it will also apply to any other type of training that the fleet is really doing. This is more about a thought process for deciding how to combine things rather than saying you must do this and you must never do that. So we're going to have some different ideas here. The first combination that we're going to talk about is something that we refer to as the orientation kickstart, because the first time that we saw people doing this was really about orientation and getting drivers onboarded, and it combines online self-study and physical or virtual class, and sometimes both. And what happens here is very simply that you have people complete those online self-study courses before they come to your physical or virtual orientation. And then when you're in that orientation with them, when you're in that class, you spend your time focusing not so much on the general content that's covered in those online courses, but you spend the time talking about company-specific things. It may be policies, it may be company supplements to that content, getting to know people and getting them to know the business. So you would typically do it for things like hours of service, vehicle inspection, anything that is regulatory and is going to be the same for everybody. Put these participants through an online course, then they can go through that information, learn the basics, and then when you get them in class, you can just review that with them and then move on to your company-specific stuff. So for instance, in inspection, they may have them go through the basics of the inspection requirements and the process, but then when you get them in the classroom, you're talking about your specific equipment and how you want them to inspect that, or how they need to be doing securement for the loads that you haul, that kind of thing. Another advantage here is that it tells you a lot about those new hires before they even show up. How many of them actually complete the content? How many of them do pretty well in it? Do they dither, do they make excuses, or do they actually get the job done? That's useful information, but also it gives the instructor data. You can see how well these people did. Do they do very well in the course? Do they have some areas that they struggle with? Are there things that they clearly need refreshers on? That's very useful information. And as an instructor, you can supplement that classroom with a little bit of detail on those areas to really help where it's needed. And it makes better use of everybody's time. You're not dragging the classroom down if you don't need to. You're going into those areas that you really need to go into because the data has shown you that that's where people need help. So very powerful tool. We've seen people cut a full day off of their orientation, and that can be really beneficial for new entrants or new hires that are trying to get started with the company. And it's more efficient for everybody. So a great way of combining online and classroom, either physical or virtual. Another variation of that, what we refer to as the forklift special, because we first saw people doing this in forklift training, is kind of a similar approach, is that you have people do online self-study in advance of attending the practical sessions. So for something like forklift, it's perfect because there's a theoretical component and a practical component that people have to complete. And the practical component has to be done one-on-one anyway. So the headache with forklift is if you do a classroom and you get 10 people in that class, then you've got to schedule individual practical sessions for all of them. By the time you get to that last session, that person has probably forgot half of what they learned in the classroom. So moving that theoretical portion into an online self-study, they can complete that part in a much more timely way. They can do it the day before, a couple of days before they attend the practical event, and it's fresh. It's more efficient for them. It's going to be more effective at getting them that content, much more flexible in terms of scheduling. So your instructor is not trying to coordinate people into a room to deliver this material. And again, they've got intel on what that person knows, how well they did on that course, and they've got some empirical data that they can work with to see where they need to spend a little bit extra time with that participant, what they need to work on, and really how they can make the most of their skills as an instructor to effectively educate this person and give them the training that they need in that area. So it also works great with inspection, works good with cargo securement. We see people doing that a lot where they will have an online cargo securement course, and then after that, you go out in the yard and you actually practice it, demonstrate those things. We have some customers that have created dedicated cargo securement practical tests that drivers have to go through, and they have to pass an actual practical test to demonstrate that they understand how to secure the loads properly. Works very well, very efficient and good combination, and keeps people engaged. It's much more enjoyable for them as well. The other side of that, the flip side, having physical and or virtual classrooms first and then going to online is most commonly seen in the systems rollout type environment. So this is one of those things where it's actually less commonly seen with drivers and more with things like dispatch, can be maintenance, different groups like that. And in those situations, you bring everybody into a class, either physical or virtual, it can work equally well, and you focus on the high level of what it is that you're doing and why. So you want to get them to understand what's in it for them, why they should care, and get them to ask their questions, address any concerns they have, and get them to buy into what you're doing. And then you move them into the detailed online content after that. So for something like a major policy change or implementing a new system, if you're implementing a new dispatch system or a new maintenance management system, that's the kind of model that works really well because it gets everybody on the same page. They understand what they should be paying attention to, kind of the business focus of why you're doing it, why they should care. And then at that point, once they buy into it, they're much better suited to go into the training online and learn the details of how that system works or how that new equipment works or what the details of that policy are. That's going to be much more useful at that point. If you try and take them into that stuff prematurely, when they haven't bought into it, they don't understand why they should care, they're not going to pay attention. It won't be sticky. But once you get them all together as a group and they buy into what you're doing, it's much more effective to get them into the details afterwards. So that's something that we see people doing for a variety of different tools. Another combination, one that I particularly like, the variety pack, where you use all three. You've got these different tools. You've got a physical class. Now most people have got virtual class available. And if you've got online self-study, use all of them and alternate them. This works great for things that are repeating content. So something like dangerous goods, hazmat stuff, fire safety, winter driving, WHMIS, all of those things that people have to get retrained on over and over and over again. You don't want to be giving them the training the same way every time because it gets boring and they sort of tune out. And all of those things, all of those different methods have, as we saw, strengths and weaknesses, and they're going to appeal to different learning styles in different ways. So if you mix it up, where this time it's a virtual class, next time maybe it's online self-study, and then after that it's maybe a physical class, that allows you to present the content in different ways to get people to approach it from different sides. Maybe this time it's an online self-study, so they're getting more theoretical stuff and they're doing interactive things on their own. Next time you bring them into a physical class and they're doing group exercises. That covers the content much more effectively, gives them a deeper understanding of it, keeps it fresh, and it's way more fun. Nobody wants to do the same thing over and over all the time. It can be quite horrible. So this way we mix it up, we get it a little bit more entertaining for people. And the last one that we're going to look at, the refresher follow-up, this is in some ways a variation of the onboarding that we were talking about before. And this really combines both online self-study and typically virtual class or individual one-on-one meetings, which is the icon on the top right there. And in this scenario, we're going to imagine that these little stick people have masks on because they're clearly not 6 feet apart, unless they're giants. But that still works. You still want to have situations where you're doing those kind of one-on-one meetings with people. And it works very well for situations where you're doing regular refresher type work. So you have people complete some content online. It might be a monthly assignment. It might be a quarterly assignment. And then you review those results. And some people are going to do fine, no issues, they move on. Others are going to maybe have some gaps or have some challenges. You see that they've got some areas where they maybe need some additional help, and you can follow up with them individually. Or if you're seeing trends, you're seeing particular groups that are struggling or have a gap in certain places, that's where you can follow up with them in a group through the virtual training. I wouldn't put them into a physical classroom. It's usually not worth the effort, but virtual class can work very well. Maybe you've got 4 people who went through this month's quarterly refresher and got a couple of gaps in a particular area or struggle in a particular area. Put them into a virtual and take advantage of the fact that you can put that content together pretty quickly, and you've got some ability to do some collaboration. And you've got a great way to follow up, have a discussion, make sure that those gaps get closed, make sure they understand what they're supposed to know, and it provides a much more complete learning experience. And it works very well in those kind of shorter, more ongoing situations. So it's a very useful tool. So that is a quick sort of look at the best and the worst of physical classroom, virtual classroom, and online self-study tools. Some things to think about when deciding how to use them, their strengths and weaknesses, and some ideas on how to put them together. I don't think those 5 are the only, by any means. Those are the ones that we see people most commonly using, but there are lots of other ones out there. So the idea here is to give you some ideas to start with, and then you can go and run with it and see what you can do to sort of put that together and create something that becomes a more effective experience for everybody. So with that, I'll open it up. Questions? Anybody, anything that they wanted to look at or follow up on? I'll open the floor for that.
Yeah, I think you have explained so well, Mark. And one question we got, if you can see the questions in the chat.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Nelson.
Yes. Yeah, it's. I think it was a very useful information, and if we really, as you said, this combination of 3, like online, classroom, and self-engaging, it's definitely, it makes more sense to me as an individual opinion. And yeah, yes, and online, yes, online trainings are always good source of educating ourselves, and does not matter how many trainings or certification you already have, keeping yourself updated all the time. It's a
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like there's any questions or any more questions. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Naveen, for having me. This has been a great experience.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for sparing your time today. And I highly want to appreciate everyone because we do these webinars every Thursday. And I notice most of the attendees are our regular participants. I want to appreciate their time. And I know everyone is busy these days. And it was a great information, Mark, by the way. And thank you for joining us.
Okay. Yeah, I see one hand raised.
Yeah,
I'm just not sure if there was a question.
Yeah, it is. Did you have a question? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to assume not. So. Okay. So thanks, Naveen, and thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think we will be finishing it 10 minutes early, 8 minutes early. If there is any other question from the attendees, and you can message us here, and Mark will reply to your question.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, and certainly feel free if you have questions to reach out to me afterwards.
Yeah, Mark, if you don't mind to sharing your phone number, please.
Yes.
Or phone number, maybe office phone number. Somebody, if anybody has a question, they can reach out to your office, to yourself, or
here.
the office.
Yep, I will put my phone number in the chat there. And my email address as well.
866, I would like to read. 866-530-2842. 2430 is a Career Edge office line. Any question you guys have, maybe can call in the office. Maybe Mark will pick up, and or somebody from the office for sure will reply to your queries. And before we go, I would like to say next Thursday we have invited Todd Moore from ISB, and we are going to talk about cargo theft in the transportation industry, how it's a kind of red flag now from the, because so many incidents happening, cargo or vehicle theft. So we will discuss on that, and he's tremendous speaker on that. I think he's a ex-cop and from the cargo theft division. So it's going to be a great webinar again. And we would like to invite all of our attendees who are today here. If you have time, please make your schedule accordingly. It's going to go another great webinar. And Trucking Network is organizing another virtual job fair for your hiring needs. If you're looking to hire more driver, owner, operator, or mechanic, or even dispatchers or another staff for the office, please feel free to contact me. And my phone number is 647-818-2121, or you have my email. So yeah, please reach out to me. Okay. I think, yeah, I think we are good to wrap up early today, and we still have a few more minutes. If anybody want to ask any question, please feel free, or we can say bye now for till next Thursday. Yeah, it was a great webinar. Lots of information. I was under impression online trainings is only about you log in into a software and you just do it, but you explained it very well, Mark, that it can be engaging. You know, even the online training can be set up in a classroom, and it can be very engaging as well to make it, you know, yeah. Okay, seems like no questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Take care.